100 years ago, an extraordinary man passed away in the Holy Land at the age of 77. He had spent more than half a century as a prisoner and in exile.
But on his release, and despite his advanced age, his health impaired by decades of imprisonment, he set off on a journey to spread a message of peace, unity, and hope to the world. His name was Abdu'l-Baha.
I could see the radiance of this man who was to make such an impression on all our lives.
You see such power latent within that person.
I never in all my life heard a voice like that. It was vibrant and ringing.
I'm Rainn Wilson.
And I'm Parisa Fitz-Henley. And in this series of podcasts, we'll be finding out about this unique figure in human history, celebrating his life and legacy and the enduring influence he has had on people around the world ever since.
When he left the house, the sun disappeared, but that kind of sunshine never leaves one's heart.
Through his public talks, his writings, his love and service to all who crossed his path, Abdu'l-Baha offered a pattern of right living to all people for all time.
He was, in every sense of the word, an ambassador to humanity. Washington, D.C., Tuesday, the 23rd of April, 1912. The clock strikes midday as Abdu'l-Baha takes to the stage of the Rankin Chapel at Howard University in front of 1,600 students, faculty, and guests. Alongside him is Louis Gregory, the second son of Ebenezer Gregory and Mary Elizabeth George, enslaved African Americans who were freed during the Civil War. Louis has been a devoted follower of Abdu'l-Baha for 3 years and has recently returned from visiting him in Egypt and the Holy Land, where they discussed race relations in America.
Howard is the nation's leading black university, founded in 1866 to educate people newly emancipated from enslavement. Abdu'l-Baha has not primarily come to Washington to meet the nation's wealthy and powerful, but to apply his wisdom to America's biggest challenge, the issue of race. The overflowing crowd in Rankin Chapel is the first predominantly black audience Abdu'l-Baha is addressing in America. He begins by drawing attention to the joy he feels at the diversity in the room. "Today I am most happy," he says, "for I see here a gathering of the servants of God. I see white and black sitting together. There are no whites and blacks before God. Strive jointly to make extraordinary progress and mix together completely." Raising the vision of his audience, Abdu'l-Baha describes the achievement of unity between the black and white people of America as essential to achieving peace.
The state of race relations in the United States at the time of Abdu'l-Baha's visit needs little introduction. Suffice it to say that around 1,000 black men and women have been lynched since the turn of the century. And just 7 years earlier, thousands of New Yorkers had watched Ota Benga, a 37-year-old pygmy from Zaire, displayed in a cage at the Bronx Zoo with an orangutan. "Is it a man or a monkey?" asked the New York Times.
So in this sorely afflicted country, ravaged by the disease of prejudice, how does Abdu'l-Baha help the people of America envisage a way forward to racial unity?
In his early meetings with Louis Gregory, Abdu'l-Baha has begun to craft a new discourse on race, with a new set of images and metaphors that consciously contradicts the ingrained, popular, social Darwinist associations. Speaking to Louis, Abdu'l-Baha says, "I liken you to the pupil of the eye. You are black, and it is black, yet it becomes the focus of light." And writing to a companion about Louis, Abdu'l-Baha says, "When he went to Stuttgart, although being of black color, yet he shone as a bright light in the meeting of the friends. He will return to America very soon, and you, the white people, should then honor and welcome this shining colored man in such a way that all the people will be astonished."
Historian Amin Egea reflects on the stark contrast between popular theories of race at the time and the vision of Abdu'l-Baha.
First of all, we have to bear in mind several facts about the context at that time. First, everybody would believe in biological determination. That is what science was saying at that time, and everybody would accept as a scientific fact the way we are, the morals we have, the way we behave. This is all determined by our body. Second, the people at that time believed that the body is determined by race. So this means your behavior, the way you are, your intelligence, your morals, everything depends on your race. Third, they believed that there were superior races and lower races, and there were men and women more apt than others. And fourth, all this was not just in the realm of ideas, but everything was translated into social organization. So there was racial segregation, there were laws against interracial marriage, and so on. All these scientific ideas, social ideas had a relevance in the way societies were organized at that time. So here comes Abdu'l-Baha with an absolutely opposite message and discourse. He says, first of all, what determines our behavior and the way we are, what defines us as human beings is not our body, it is our soul. And the way we are does not depend on material factors, it depends mostly on education. According to our education, we can be a good person or a bad person. We can manifest in our life some values or others. All this depends on our education. Second, he says, races do not exist, which was completely against science at the time. It would take more than half a century until some scientists started to say that the concept of race is a social construction with no biological reality behind it. But Abdu'l-Baha would already say this even in his correspondence long before the First World War. All these distinctions made between human beings on account of the color of their skin, this is just fallacy, an illusion, a fantasy.
In a time saturated with toxic, racist, and anti-black language, Abdu'l-Baha challenges the views of his audiences with a new vocabulary of racial unity and fellowship, recasting racial differences as a source of beauty and strength. To one audience, he says, "In the vegetable kingdom, the colors of multicolored flowers are not the cause of discord. Rather, colors are the cause of the adornment of the garden, because a single color has no appeal. But when you observe many-colored flowers, there is charm and display. The world of humanity, too, is like a garden, and humankind are like the many-colored flowers. In the clustered jewels of the races, may the blacks be as sapphires and rubies, and the whites as diamonds and pearls. The composite beauty of humanity will be witnessed in their unity and blending."
Though Washington, D.C. is one of the most racially mixed cities in the U.S., it has deep racial problems that are manifest in its entrenched social conventions. Many venues are segregated, and even those who profess commitment to racial equality refrain from mixing for fear of social reprisal. But Abdu'l-Baha, in his gentle yet strong, conscious manner, continuously defies these conventions during his stay. After a committee organizes a talk for him at one of the city's most exclusive hotels, one that is known to refuse entry to black people, Abdu'l-Baha demands that the black people be able to attend the talk. The hotel relents, and black and white people sit side by side in the hotel's first ever desegregated event.
Another story tells of Abdu'l-Baha defying social conventions regarding race. One afternoon, he is invited to attend a lunch along with some of Washington's social and political elite. Before the meal is served, Abdu'l-Baha requests that Louis Gregory be invited for an interview. After Louis has spoken with the guests, following the social code prevalent in Washington social circles at the time, as a black man, he draws back and prepares to leave the building while the white guests proceed to seat themselves to eat. But suddenly, Abdu'l-Baha calls out, "Where is Mr. Gregory? Bring Mr. Gregory." By the time they bring Louis back into the room, Abdu'l-Baha has rearranged the table and placed Louis in the seat of honor at his right. He looks at the rest of the guests and exclaims how pleased he is to have Mr. Gregory there, and then, in the most natural way, as if nothing unusual has happened, proceeds to give a talk on the oneness of mankind and the need for unity among the races of the world.
Accounts by those present testify to the ease with which Abdu'l-Baha defies such racial conventions, as if they did not in fact exist. Gently yet unmistakably, he has assaulted the customs of a city that was scandalized only a decade earlier by President Roosevelt's dinner invitation to Booker T. Washington. From D.C., Abdu'l-Baha travels next to Chicago, where he speaks again of racial unity in 3 major speeches. He says in one, "The ages of darkness have passed away, and the century of light has come. Ignorant prejudices are being dispelled, and the light of unity is shining."
On the 30th of April, 1912, Abdu'l-Baha addresses the closing session of the 4th Convention of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So central to Abdu'l-Baha's mission is race unity that he declines an invitation to address the U.S. Congress in order to keep his commitment to the NAACP. He speaks to a thronging crowd about the common origins of humanity. 1,000 people are turned away. There's not even standing room. In attendance is W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the founders of the NAACP. Robert Stockman is a historian of the Baha'i faith in America.
Abdu'l-Baha met Du Bois in New York and then again in Chicago. And Du Bois clearly was impressed by Abdu'l-Baha. He covered Abdu'l-Baha's visit in Chicago in The Crisis, which was the NAACP's monthly magazine. And every month, The Crisis would have an article about the man of the month. The man of the month might, for example, be a glee club at an African-American college down south. Or it might be an African-American man who'd achieved something in his local town that had helped perhaps improve the situation of the African-American population. And in 1912, he had Abdu'l-Baha as the man of the month. He did not usually have white people as the man of the month in The Crisis. And so clearly Du Bois was impressed by Abdu'l-Baha. When Abdu'l-Baha was speaking in Washington, D.C. in April of 1912, something like 10,000 people heard him speak in that week. And about half of them heard him in African-American venues, and about half of them in venues which were most likely majority white. So he achieved a remarkably large audience amongst African Americans in Washington, D.C., and both the Chicago Defender, which was a regular African American newspaper in Chicago, and the Washington Bee, which was the newspaper published by African Americans in Washington, covered his visit pretty extensively. And those papers plus The Crisis would have been read quite widely around the United States.
Abdu'l-Baha gives talks on racial unity throughout the United States during his 239-day stay, acquainting tens of thousands of people of all creeds, colors, and classes with the vision of a unified humanity in which the scourge of racial prejudice has been eliminated. Yet one signal act is left to be done that will forever imprint the urgent imperative of race unity on the minds and hearts of those who follow him. Abdu'l-Baha encourages the marriage of Louis Gregory to a white English woman, Louisa Matthew. Debunking the sexual myths and fears at the heart of American racism, Abdu'l-Baha says that interracial marriages will serve as a powerful example of unity, despite such marriages being virtually unthinkable at the time. They defy not just social convention, but popular science, which abounds with baseless theories of racial inferiority and of the harmful effects of racial mixing. Yet undeterred by such conventions, Abdu'l-Baha further encourages Louisa Matthew, who had met Louis Gregory some years earlier. She finds herself on a train to Chicago with Abdu'l-Baha.
Abdu'l-Baha said to me, "How are you and Mr. Gregory getting along?" Startled, I answered, "What do you mean? We are good friends." To which he replied emphatically, and with his face wreathed in mischievous smiles, "You must become very good friends."
Love grows in the hearts of Louis and Louisa, and they marry in September, despite the fact that they're unable to travel together to about half of the states in the country, as they all outlaw interracial marriage. To some, their marriage is an eccentricity at best. To others, an affront, or, quite literally, a crime. Yet, for the community in America so suspicious of interracial mixing, to see Abdu'l-Baha positively encouraging this marriage conveys a profound lesson. He writes to the couple, "Continually do I remember you. I beg of God that through you good fellowship may be obtained between the white and the black, for you are an introduction to the accomplishment." Over time, Louisa comes to understand the significance of her marriage to Louis. She later writes to a friend in Washington,
"Some 2 years after our marriage, I suddenly realized what Abdu'l-Baha had meant when he said, 'I saw a seed in your heart.' The seed I realized was the attraction between Louis and myself. The one seed producing many seeds is the attraction of the hearts of the white and colored races to be produced by our love and marriage. Our marriage, therefore, is important, as Abdu'l-Baha has indicated. He said, I heard later, that the importance of our marriage was not understood at that time, but would be understood later. It was the first interracial marriage between these two races among the Baha'is, and known to be brought about by Abdu'l-Baha himself, thus encouraging interracial marriage and letting the Baha'is know he encouraged it. Since then, I suppose you know, there have been 2 of these marriages among Baha'is, neither of which I think would have taken place without the example of our marriage.
Thus, Abdu'l-Baha seeks to transform the community of Baha'i followers itself into an example of the teachings he's promoting.
He worked also in transforming the Baha'i communities into an embodiment of those very same teachings he was promulgating in his many talks and interviews with the press.
Amin Egea.
So, for instance, he would not limit himself to speak in favor of human equality or against racism or sexism. But he also transformed the Baha'i communities in the West into racially integrated communities that were able to hold meetings in which people of many races would participate together, would take decisions together. And all that was quite revolutionary at the time when there was racial segregation, when racism was considered something backed by scientific fact. The fact that Abdu'l-Baha was able to transform the Baha'i communities into an embodiment, a reference for the world to see, a model of the teachings of his father, was a quite relevant aspect of his travels. So it was this twofold purpose. On the one hand, to promulgate the teachings of his father, and on the other hand, to transform the Baha'i communities so that mankind could see what social implications those teachings revealed by Baha'u'llah had.
Abdu'l-Baha's style when challenging racist views is always gentle and loving. One distinguished Baha'i writer, George Townsend, writes,
"In teaching the Americans about racial unity, Abdu'l-Baha did not command. His appeal was to reason, to logic, to faith, and to facts. He exposed the false hopes of the arrogant white race not by disproof, but by drawing, in a quite natural manner, a picture of the true antecedents of the kingdom, showing it to be involved in the original creation of man."
Nwandi Lawson is an educator who studied at Howard University and regularly visited Rankin Chapel. At the time, she did not know of its connection with Abdu'l-Baha.
The wonderful gift that we have in the West is these stories, I think, of Abdu'l-Baha traveling through Europe, traveling through North America, and seeing people like ourselves, if you will, who, of course, were struggling somewhat with these concepts in some cases that we hadn't been introduced to, but who, in various ways, arose. I think about in the United States, Abdu'l-Baha comes, it's like 50 years since the ending of a period of enslavement for African Americans. And he redefines the whole social order in terms of the relationship between blacks and whites. But he does it in a way that doesn't drive a wedge or push people out because they do not know how to free themselves from racist thoughts and practices. Rather, he's gently guiding them. And so I guess when I think about the importance of Abdu'l-Baha to the life of humanity, it is that we would need such an example that is not so far removed from us that we would just dismiss it and say, well, this is beyond me. I am not God, so I cannot actually do these things. But rather, someone who exemplified such attributes of God in everything that he did and gave the rest of us these small steps that we can take toward trying to exemplify those as well.
W.E.B. Du Bois writes of Abdu'l-Baha's approach as calm, sweet universalism. But Abdu'l-Baha harbors no illusions about the systemic crisis that the race problem poses for America's social fabric. The problem is urgent and requires immediate, systematic intervention. He writes, "Until these prejudices are entirely removed from the people of the world, the realm of humanity will not find rest. Nay, rather, discord and bloodshed will be increased day by day, and the foundation of the prosperity of the world of man will be destroyed."
Following Abdu'l-Baha's departure from America, the matter of race remains at the forefront of his mind. "There is a greater danger than only the shedding of blood," he writes. "It is the destruction of America. Now is the time for the Americans to take up this matter and unite both the white and colored races. Otherwise, hasten ye towards destruction, hasten ye towards devastation." And he puts little faith in the ability of legal and political equality alone to remove underlying race hatred. He says, "You may bring all the physical powers of the earth and try by their means to make a union where all will love each other, where all will have peace. But it will end in failure. Human solidarity is greater than equality. Equality is obtained more or less through coercion or legislation, but human solidarity is realized through the exercise of free will."
Unfortunately, the fears of Abdu'l-Baha come to pass in America. Deepening animosity toward black people in the country is vented in unprovoked attacks. The Ku Klux Klan is reestablished in the South and spreads throughout the country. The summer of 1919 is the greatest period of interracial strife the nation has experienced, as 25 violent upheavals take place in urban centers. They are all begun by white people seeking to terrorize the black population into submission. With the country in the throes of racial upheaval, Abdu'l-Baha, frail and worn, gathers the strength to rally the American Baha'i community for what is to be one of its signature contributions to race amity in the United States.
Abdu'l-Baha set in motion a plan that was to bring the races together,
writes Lewis Gregory,
attract the attention of the country, enlist the aid of famous and influential people, and have a far-reaching effect upon the destiny of the nation itself.
In another unprecedented act, Abdu'l-Baha asks Agnes Parsons, a high-ranking member of Washington society, to organize the first in a series of major conferences for racial amity. Nwandi Lawson reflects on this unusual choice.
Back in 1912, when Abdu'l-Baha first met Agnes Parsons and her husband, they were not people who were very interested in the Baha'i faith as a method for bringing together the races. In fact, Agnes Parsons acknowledged she was rather uncomfortable around black people and really had no reason in her social milieu to interact. And at one point, her husband made a comment to Abdu'l-Baha that it would be better if all of the black people would return to Africa. And Abdu'l-Baha replied to him with a great deal of mirth that, well, if that were to occur, it would probably have to start with the family servant, Wilbur. and calling this black man by name, he, of course, helped to draw the family to the idea that this notion that we're going to send all of the black people back to Africa, well, certainly if that is the truth as you see it, it also includes the black people who are taking care of you and your family. So in any case, going well beyond the fact that this family was not particularly racially progressive as we would characterize it today, isn't it interesting that Abdu'l-Baha called on Agnes Parsons to organize this race amity conference? He didn't turn his back on her. He didn't say that family isn't woke. Instead, he called them to their highest potential, and it was a struggle for them. But in the end, both Agnes Parsons, with assistance from such luminaries as Louis Gregory, these two had to learn in sometimes very challenging ways how to move this forward. And in the end, each was able to play his or her own part. Louis Gregory constantly reminding the friends, including Agnes Parsons, of the real necessity of bringing about this work of race unity. And Agnes Parsons, by the way, though being a person of means, being able to bring her friends who had also material wealth into even funding this, whether or not they fully understood what the significance of such a conference would be. So I really looked to the master and I said, my goodness, I want to be able to see with eyes like that can see the potential and capacity, even when the person initially maybe strikes me as saying something that doesn't necessarily reflect the oneness of humanity or the inherent nobility of all people. But could that person perhaps be the one who helps to bring people together in this way? And in the end, Agnes Parsons was that person.
19,000 programs are circulated in churches, schools, hotels, and other public places, straightforwardly announcing that half a century ago in America, slavery was abolished. Now there has arisen a need for another great effort in order that prejudice may be overcome. Correction of the present wrong requires no army, for the field of action is the hearts of our citizens. The message of the convention is strikingly different in content and scope from anything else being said. Racial segregation is still the law of the land in much of the country, and few organizations of any kind stand for equality. But the convention seeks to expand and enlarge the thinking about racial equality. Abdu'l-Baha himself writes and addresses the conference. Say to this convention that never since the beginning of time has one more important been held. This convention stands for the oneness of humanity. It will become the cause of the enlightenment of America. It will, if wisely managed and continued, check the deadly struggle between these races which otherwise will inevitably break out. Less than 6 months later, Abdu'l-Baha passes away in the Holy Land.
In the decades since Abdu'l-Baha's visit, though the United States has continued to struggle to achieve race unity, millions of people have endeavored to contribute their share to its realization. Among them are individuals directly inspired by Abdu'l-Baha's effort to heal the nation's racial wounds. During some of the country's worst racial crises, Baha'is have joined the valiant and difficult struggle not only to hold back the tide of racism, but also to build a multiracial community based on the recognition of the organic unity of the human race. In the 1920s and 30s, the race amity movement initiated by Abdu'l-Baha casts a small but powerful beam of light through the thick, hate-filled fog of racism. During the turbulent 1960s, the Baha'is continued to work tirelessly to promote racial unity. They establish an annual Baha'i Race Amity Day, which begins a tide of race unity days. By 1967, 11 mayors and 1 governor officially proclaim a Race Unity Day.
The 1970s and 80s see a significant increase in the racial and ethnic diversity of the membership in the Baha'i community in America. By the mid-80s, it is becoming a truly multi-ethnic community, with fully 1/3 of its members black and rural, and a significant percentage from the Native American, Hispanic, and Southeast Asian populations. Indeed, today the Baha'i faith is the second largest religion in the birth state of Louis Gregory, South Carolina. During the 1992 Los Angeles uprising, the National Baha'i Governing Council of the United States writes to the mayor,
We join you in your appeal to all our fellow citizens not to be blinded by anger and hate. The American Baha'i community, faithful to the teachings of its founder, has worked for the establishment of racial unity in a country blighted by race prejudice that confronts its cherished values, threatens its peace, and poisons the soul of its citizens. We offer you, Mr. Mayor, our cooperation, and pray that Los Angeles will emerge from its trials more enlightened and dedicated to the realization of the great truth that we are all the leaves of one tree and the drops of one ocean.
And today, those inspired by the example of Abdu'l-Baha are working with their neighbors and friends to address issues of social and racial injustice by building communities based on the principle of oneness.
One of the things that I focus on is working with community building activities in African American communities, which traditionally, of course, are very oppressed places, many of them without many economic means. But one of the things that I always want to do is to kind of reframe how we do this service, because many good-natured, well-meaning people have sought to take special Black people out of the ghetto. And that's a mission of theirs. They identify a few youth and they say, these are people of potential. Let us move them so they won't be in this deplorable situation. I think the Baha'i approach to community building is that every place on earth is the kingdom of God, has the potential to be so, and every place on earth has the potential to be a rose garden. And so rather than us seeing how do we get out of this place, it's how do we dig into this place? How do we plant the things that are going to grow and make our community as beautiful and beneficial as any other place on earth, because we're noble. And God has made it so. So I think definitely having that as a model, this idea of radiant acquiescence, lets us know that even under the highest forms of oppression, we can still build and we can still leave the world more beautiful and more beneficial than when we inherited it.
Abdu'l-Baha envisions a just society in which all recognize the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But he shows us that it's not enough simply to believe this in our hearts. There is also the moral imperative to act, and to view all aspects of life through the lens of justice. His vision implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved.
In the next podcast, as women all over the world campaigned for the vote and the very social order was being called into question, what did Abdu'l-Baha have to say about the hot-button issue of gender equality?